Hello and welcome to a second in a Halloween reading series by Raxel 1447. This is Rose Rose by Barry Payne. Sefton stepped back from his picture. "Rest now, please," he said. Miss Rose Rose, his model, threw a striped blanket over herself, stepped from the throne, and crossed the studio. She was beautiful from the crown of her head to the soles of her feet. Every pose she took was graceful. She was the daughter of an artist model and had been working since childhood. Rose Rose wasn't cultured, or businesslike, or educated. Modeling was all she knew, and she was the best. Once she held the same pose, without resting, for 3 solid hours. While Rose Rose was getting dressed, Sefton flung himself into an easy chair and studied his painting. He was a man of 40, thick-set, round-faced, with the reddest mustache that turned fiercely upward. He was lucky to have Rose Rose model for him. She had exactly the right look for his painting of Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, but even though she was a most highly paid model, though she couldn't always be depended on to arrive at the studio on time. On wintry mornings, when every hour of daylight was precious, she might be 2 hours late, or she might not show up at all. Still, her talents were so extraordinary that artists always came back to her. "Can you be here tomorrow at 9?" asked Sefton to Rose Rose as she stepped out from behind the changing screen. "A 1/4 would be better," Rose replied. "Well, all right," Sefton reluctantly agreed. "I know what you're thinking, Mr. Sefton," said Rose Rose. "You think I don't mean to come tomorrow. You've been listening to Mr. Marion, all because I was late for him once. With good reason, too. Mr. Marion recommended you to me, Miss Rose, but he suggested I never let you out of my sight. You will be here on time tomorrow, won't you?" urged the artist. "You needn't worry about that," said Miss Rose eagerly. "I'll be here at 9:15 no matter what happens, even if I die first. Is that good enough for you, Mr. Sefton?" Despite Miss Rose's promise, he didn't feel sure of her. The next morning Sefton arrived at the studio at 8:30. He set out his paints and selected his brushes. As he studied the painting, he noticed that Aphrodite's face had a mocking expression. It was just before 9 when he found that he was out of cigarettes. He still had time to go to the shop around the corner. In case Rose Rose arrived while he was away, he left the studio door open. Sefton figured that Rose Rose would be at least 20 minutes late. While he was at the shop, he brought a newspaper to occupy him as he waited. But on his return, he found his model already stepping onto the throne. "Good morning, Miss Rose. You're a lady of your word." Rose murmured a reply, but Sefton's mind was already on the painting. The work went well, and Rose Rose showed no sign of tiring. Sefton worked for more than an hour before he realized Rose Rose should take a break. "We'll have a rest now, Miss Rose," he said cheerily. At that moment, he felt the unmistakable touch of human fingers drawn lightly against the back of his neck. He spun around with a sudden start. No one was there. He turned back to the throne. Rose Rose had vanished. With great care he put down his palette and brushes. He said in a loud voice, "Where are you, Miss Rose?" Silence hung in the hot air of the studio. He repeated the question and got no answer. He stepped behind the dressing screen. Then a most terrifying thought struck him. His model had not been there at all. He sat down and tried to think of an explanation. He'd been working very hard lately, he told himself. He was too wrapped up in the painting. He expected to see Rose Rose when he returned from the shop, so his mind told him that she was there. He couldn't convince himself. Nothing like this had ever happened before. The more he thought about it, the more frightened he became. To calm his nerves, Sefton picked up the newspaper. Reading about day-to-day events would surely settle his nerves. Even so, he couldn't escape the fact that for the last hour he had done his most delicate work, and the model wasn't even there. Sefton tried to focus on the newspaper, then his eye fell on the paragraph headed "Motor Fatalities." He read that Miss Rose Rose, an artist model, has been struck by a car around 7 o'clock the night before. She had died a short time after. Sefton rose from his chair and opened a large pocket knife. He felt a mad impulse to slash the canvas to rags. He stopped before the painting. The face of Aphrodite smiled at him with an unearthly, eerie, but irresistible sweetness. In the months that followed, Sefton allowed no one to visit him while he finished the painting. His friends wondered who the model was, since Rose was dead. Sefton refused to say. Rose kept her appointments with Sefton, even though she had to travel to the studio from beyond the grave. As for the painting, it was an immediate success. It was found in Sefton's abandoned studio. The artist was never heard from again.